A reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verse 53 through 56. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored at the boat. When they got out of the boat, the people at once recognized him and rushed about the whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplace, and they begged him that they might touch even a fringe of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. This is the word of the Lord for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Ashton was in my younger grade a couple years ago, K through third on Wednesday nights, and he always would read scripture, and he always reads so clearly. So thank you very much, Ashton, and thank you, David, for leading us in that prayer. There's a story of two business owners who had been together and working side by side for many years, but then they came upon trouble, and in the midst of a financial ruin they faced. It was a storm of life that they had not expected. As their debt grew, they were faced with not only bankruptcy and losing their business, but their retirement accounts, their houses, and because of the stress, even their spouses and family. They knew they needed help. They knew they needed help, and they did everything in their power to try to get it. And finally, though they were not religious men, they decided that prayer, or this thing they heard about called prayer, was all that was left. So in the peak of their turmoil, one of them shouted, the only prayer he could think to muster, said, "Oh God, I know I haven't bothered you for the past 15 years we've been in business. But if you just get us out of this mess, I promise I won't bother you again for another 15 years. Unfortunately, that's how a lot of us approach our need for God. It's in that time of distress or turmoil. We might have met Jesus and God earlier in our life or at some point in our life, but then life has just happened and we're sort of on the outskirts of the crowd. We're sitting there on the outskirts. Maybe we sort of think that's him down there, or maybe we're a little closer. But it's a crowd and it's hard to see through. Now, I want to ask you, how many of you like crowds? Anybody? Ah, come on. I know some of you must like this first type of crowd. It's a Christmas crowd. I know you love to go Christmas shopping. Yeah, how many of you want to really admit you go out on Black Friday? In the crowd, I don't know how you do it.
I do.
And then maybe the type of crowd you're most familiar with, at least in this past week or so, or last weekend, was this type. The back to school crowd. Especially when it's free tax weekend. I know I was out recently and people were pushing and shoving and racks were empty. And you know, sometimes crowds aren't that bad. Sometimes it really just depends on the mood. I mean, there's crowds of football games. I know many of you will fight those crowds. You know, or it might be a concert or a theatrical thing. So a lot of times the crowd depends on the mood. And hopefully you see this type of crowd. A happy crowd. They're not pushing or shoving. It's busy and it's packed, but they got smiles on their faces. Now, it's when you see the next type that we don't like. The mad crowd, or the fighting crowd, or the aggressive, assertive, I want that, you don't get it. And I'll fight for it. I'll fight for it. You know, it's like, if we could just sometimes take that passion, that same passion, and fight lovingly, for our relationship with Christ to get closer. Our scripture today talks about a crowd who was seeking something. They were seeking Jesus. They were seeking Him. They were seeking Him so much they wanted to touch the hem of His cloak. Now, in the past, when I think of people seeking Jesus, I sort of think of it like this. Everybody's close to Jesus. He's in the center. They're not knocking anybody over. They're listening. But unfortunately, I think sometimes this is the way we seek Jesus. Think about it. I want to be in the church, but I want to be in the back. Now, I had this on my Facebook post. I had seen it from someone, and a Lutheran friend said, you know, the good Lutherans sit in the back. I said, well, if you sit in the back, it must be the great Lutherans. Yeah, but I mean, in a sense, and obviously that's in a church, but I think that's symbolic of our life. That we want Jesus, but we want Him at a distance. We want Him at a distance. Our scripture shows that the people that were following Jesus had just fed 5,000. He had then told, everybody was tired, He told the disciples, go out into the boat, I'm going to stay on the land and pray and send these people off. And then after His prayer, He walked on water. And the disciples who have just witnessed Him, the miracle of the multiplication, God's math, of loaves and fishes, freaked out when Jesus walked on water. It's like you just saw all these 5,000 plus get fed. But as they saw him walk on water, then as he landed again, and just Sarat, their people were coming at him. They wanted more Jesus. They wanted to touch him. They knew by being closer, that's where the healing comes. That's where lives are changed, in His presence. I don't picture Him shoving and pushing, but I picture them wanting to be closer and closer. There are people that may be in our own family that might be on the outskirts, and we know what that feels like, especially if we want them in relationship. Has there been a brother or sister, a mother, a dad, a child, a son, a daughter, or a nephew, or grandchild that you want to be in a relationship, but for some reason, they have put you at arm's length? And you do everything you can to get their attention, but they put you at arm's length. Well, I imagine Jesus has even that much more passion for you. And He does everything He can to draw you near to Him. For He is faithful. He is faithful. His word says He knows you. His word says He loves you. That He's there for you. That He knows your name. Call out and He'll hear. He even heard those two businessmen. But just like that relative you might have, or that friend you might have that's at a distance, and how that hurts you, imagine how much more that breaks God's heart for you. To want you close. You know, I think Steve and I serve on the Zelwood Elementary CAT team, Community Action Team. And we partner with this great group of teachers and principals here. And you know, we talk about all the time of how to draw in parents to really care in the way that would really help their child's education, and to care for the teachers. And they're faithful in trying, and doing everything they can, putting in long hours that's not on the clock, giving money of their own pocketbook, praying for those that pray, making calls, but yet there's still some student that their heart breaks for, because they just know if the parents would get more involved, how much more that child can discover their purpose. We as the church is no different. That we know, we know that the more you seek God, the more you're willing to get involved in your life, those children's life, the parents' life, the teacher's life, the neighbor, the person with much and the person with nothing. As we draw into that crowd of Jesus and make him center. See, God is center of this world, whether we are with him or not. He's the one that breathed it into being and breathed us into being and just spoke the creation out of darkness and chaos into being. The Creator is the center of the creation. But do we have him centered in our crowd? Think about your crowd. Think about your sphere of influence. Think about those things. It might not even be people. Those things you put around your life. Envision it. Where's Jesus? Is he the one that looks like he's on your outskirts? Or is he the one that's center of your life? See, God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. A lot of times I'll have people come to me and ask about Methodism and whether we re-baptize. I was baptized as a baby. Will you re-baptize me as an adult? And I tell them we don't re-baptize in the Methodist Church because we believe the first one stuck. Because God was faithful then and is still faithful. Even if in our unfaithfulness we strayed, God is still faithful to the covenant that we made in baptism or is made on our behalf and confirmed in confirmation. Now we'll do what's called, and we did it actually last week in our service, a reaffirming of our baptism, remembering what it means to be baptized creations. But we don't need a do-over. God didn't go anywhere. God didn't move, we did. So our purpose is to put God in center of our life. We also see that the purpose is to be with Jesus so much that people see him. I was up in Maine, as some of you know, this summer. And there was a few days where the water was high on our bay. And it was completely still. I mean, when I was with some friends younger in life, they used to call that a glass lake or a glass sea. Because it's completely still. And when it's like that, just still in the presence, you see a mirror image of whatever is above the water into the water. So you'd see two of me if I was standing, you'd see two of me if I was standing on the shore. A perfect reflection down. You see that in mountains and trees, that almost looks like an image that goes like that, and there's really a water line. A perfect reflection. That's the type of reflection that Jesus wants in us. He doesn't want us with the rocky water, sometimes looking a little like him, sort of, kind of. He wants a perfect reflection. And sometimes that requires, not sometimes, it does require us being still with him. And as we are, we move when he moves. When he moves the mountain moves. When he moves and we follow tight in that crowd, his reflection is seen and given. He wants that picture reflection for us. He also wants us to understand our purpose. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German Lutheran pastor, who was arrested by the Gestapo, put in prison, and after a while actually executed as part of his conspiracy with Hitler. While he was in prison, he still reflected the light of Christ. He wrote, and did so in one way as was writing. He wrote letters and notes, and his sisters and some sympathetic guards would smuggle these notes out of prison. And it would get to his best friend, Ephraim Bethage. And Ephraim took them, collected them, and buried them so no one would find them until the end of the war. And after the end of the war, he dug them up and he published them in a book called Letters and Notes from Prison. And this is one of the notes that Bonhoeffer had written. He says, "I believe that God will give us all the strength that we need to help resist in times of distress. But he never gives it in advance, lest we should rely on ourselves and not on him alone." Not on him alone. We try to make things happen so much out of our efforts. By reflecting, by drawing near to center. Our efforts don't need to be our efforts, but to allow God's efforts. Our purpose becomes an understanding what Jesus wants for us. The great commandment, number 1. Love God. I'd say easy enough, but it isn't always, because we get in the way. Love others as you love yourself. And then what continues in that passage, it says, and love your enemies. I think the most difficult part. For me to do it, but not for God to do it. So he first calls us to. That's Christian perfection of us getting closer and drawing near to loving God and loving others, all others. And the Great Commission as disciples, as followers, as people that have said yes. He's given us a commission. He has commissioned us that in everything we do, whether we're a teacher or work at a nursery or work at the 7-Eleven or work helping neighbors around the community, make disciples. Make disciples for Christ, baptizing them in the name of Christ, teaching their ways. So in one sense, for all teachers, but like our teachers on this Back to School Sunday went through lots of education, we are still in the education of life. Draw near to the center. Ask yourself, what is your center? And if it's not the face of Jesus, ask God to help, for he will. See, God will do it over and over again. He'll keep doing it. He's faithful. His faithfulness is great. We sang that. He will make a way when we don't understand and can't see a way. He'll do it again. Let us pray. Almighty God, do it again in each one of us today. Let us be on the inner rings. Let us be so close that we can touch the hem and we can receive that healing that came when everyone did. For it's in you and through you that healing from our sin, healing from our desperations and our distresses, all types of healing happens. We thank you. Do it again for us, Lord. Just